Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cat 5 Ready, Business Continuity in the Eye of the Storm, brought to you by Cloud Carib Limited, the leading cybersecurity managed services company in the region. I'm Michelle Marius from ICT Pulse, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you for joining us, especially during one of the most important times of the year for Caribbean businesses. As I said, my name is Michelle Marius. I'm the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse and the host of the ICT Pulse podcast. We have been around for 15 years, and one of the key objectives of these platforms is to discuss ICT and technology issues from a Caribbean perspective. So thank you so much for having me. And let's just move right into it because we have a lot to cover within a relatively short space of time. And in a single year, storm damage can cost Caribbean economies the equivalent of 17% of GDP. Last year alone, Hurricane Melissa cost Jamaica between 28 and 32% of GDP, and that was just one single event. For businesses across the region, the question is no longer if disruption will come, it's whether you'll be ready when it does. And while hurricanes often dominate the headlines, business disruptions does not always come from a direct hit. A storm can pass nearby and still take out power, disrupt staff mobility, affect telecoms nodes, damage supply chains, or trigger flooding that bring operations to a halt. For many businesses, the impact is indirect, but the losses are very real. Most organizations have some plan, but one of the biggest risks is waiting too late. Many organizations wait until a storm is already tracking towards them before thinking about structural assessments, insurance reviews, backup systems, or staff readiness. By then, there's very little room to correct any major gaps. But when a major storm hits, the gaps tend to be the same. Buildings that were never structurally assessed, insurance policies that don't reflect the real exposure, and IT systems that weren't built to stay up when everything else goes down. Today, we are hoping to close these gaps in one focused hour. So we're going to be tackling 3 mission-critical pillars: physical protection, digital resilience, and insurance readiness. And when we say physical protection, identifying structural vulnerabilities before disaster strikes. Digital resilience, cloud backup, disaster recovery that keeps you running, and insurance readiness, which would include coverage and risk documentation for faster recovery. We'll hear from practitioners who work on these challenges every day across the Caribbean. This is a practical conversation, not theory. Before we begin, let's get a bit of housekeeping done. Things to note about WebEx meetings: look for the Q&A section to ask questions. Join us in the chat and take polls in the right-hand panel on the app viewer. And also, a copy of the recording and summary notes will be shared following the webinar, so we hope you'll be able to just actively participate in the discussions. And now let's meet the panelists, our distinguished panelists to boot. First, we have Mark Aruda, the VP of Solutions from our host Cloud Carib Limited, a leading cybersecurity managed services company in the Caribbean. Mark brings over 20 years of global technology leadership and leads a team responsible for helping organizations across the Caribbean adopt secure, modern cloud platforms and strengthen their digital resilience. Next, we have Christopher Wells, a structural engineer at Structured Bahamas. Over the course of his career, Chris has contributed to the design and delivery of residential, commercial, marine, and industrial structures throughout the major islands of the Bahamas. His work reflects a deep understanding of local environmental conditions, coastal dynamics, and hurricane-resilient design, expertise shaped by both professional training and lived experience. Christopher is an expert in structural assessment and building code compliance in the Caribbean, with deep knowledge of the vulnerabilities that many organizations do not know they have until a storm or other incident exposes them. We are also joined by Gabrielle McKenzie, Agency Manager at CG Atlantic Insurance Agents and Brokers Limited. She's a chartered insurance broker and an associate of the Chartered Insurance Institute in the UK with over 13 years experience in property and casualty insurance, specializing in commercial lines and company portfolio management. Gabrielle brings expertise in comprehensive insurance coverage and risk documentation, helping businesses understand how to protect themselves financially before, during, and after a major event. And finally, we have Chaz Garraway, a civil and climate science engineer. Chaz brings a unique lens to this conversation, the intersection of climate science and physical infrastructure, and why both need to be part of any serious continuity plan. Chaz is currently a climate science and engineering master's student at Northwestern University in Boston. And prior to pursuing his graduate studies, he worked as a civil, coastal, and water resources engineer on a multitude of infrastructure and modeling projects. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Okay, so let's kick off this discussion. And folks, to all of the panelists, and in one sentence, what is the single biggest business continuity risk Caribbean organizations are underestimating right now? And let's start with Chaz, then Chris, then Gabrielle, and Mark, if you would just bring up the rear. So one sentence, please.
In one sentence, I would have to say, well, first, good morning, everyone. But in one sentence, I would have to say a single point of failure.
So, good morning, guys. Single biggest engineering risk that, from my perspective, is the underestimating of the hidden vulnerability of older buildings whose structural systems were not designed for today's increased wind speeds.
Gabrielle, you're muted.
Yes, I would say the single biggest risk right now is underestimating the importance of having your business, your properties insured for hurricane risks.
And Mark?
I would say not planning thoroughly enough for a disaster and not understanding the complexity when that disaster does happen. We may think we're ready, but we're typically not unless we practice.
Well, we're going to be jumping into it and getting some more details from each of our panelists along those lines. I think most of them shared with us basically based on their own area of expertise where they see some of the challenges currently. So we're going to move on to physical protection, which was one of the pillars that we're going to be discussing. And Chris, we're going to start with you. So the Bahamas Building Code hasn't been updated since 2003. And Jamaica recently started updating theirs 20 years later, thanks to Hurricane Melissa. But what does it actually mean for a business operating out of a building that was built or renovated under these older codes? And maybe just to sort of help us to broaden that a little bit, for businesses that may have gone through a few storms without any direct hits, is there a false sense of security they might have? So in other words, can repeated exposure to heavy rain, wind, salt air, and near-miss storms still compromise a building over time?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it only takes the perfect storm, right, with the right wind speed from the right direction to cause significant damage. But with the building codes not being updated, many of the older codes have what we call prescriptive designs, right? So essentially, it tells you, here in the Bahamas, block and tie column system. So you're not designing for each load condition, right? It's something that's laid out. Hey, this is the columns you put in, this is the beams. So some of those structures would not be designed for the updated wind speeds or the storm surge conditions. So it also in most codes, there's no really design provisions for glazing, right, which are the windows and doors, to be designed for wind pressures or missile impact, which is essentially like a piece of 2x4 being picked up and thrown by the wind. Many business owners take the initiative to protect the glazing during, the case of hurricane warning. But during the most of the damage that was seen was from storm surge inundation, which with storm surge is kind of financially not feasible to design for unless have elevated areas where you can build up on a hill or raise your building, right? Most people want to have their businesses at street level, especially in the Bahamas, which we're low lying all over, so it's difficult to build up higher. And also from a perspective of engineers, right? We're taught and ethically we design to the latest international building codes, right? Which is either the IBC, which is International Building Code, which a lot of Caribbean nations have adopted, and that's one of the things that the Bahamas was looking at is adopting that code, which is updated every 3 to 6 years. And also we designed to the American code, which is the ASC 7, which lays out all your wind load conditions, right, and higher wind speeds, etc. So we're just waiting to see if the Bahamas does adopt that IBC. I know Jamaica's in the process. They have adopted it, but they're updating it now. It's not implemented, but we need to be proactive rather than reactive, which is an issue a lot of times.
Indeed. I mean, there's so much to unpack, but I think what I'm really sort of taking away from what you're saying is just that we are really trying to keep up with the developments that are happening, how we are trying to ensure that our building codes and practices continue to evolve, but that in and of itself can be a challenge. But Christopher, let me then follow up with another question. A lot of our business owners think about structural assessments only when a storm is approaching. But by then, contractors, engineers, supplies, and time are all limited. So walk us through what a structural assessment actually looks like. What should businesses be checking for before storm peaks, and what surprises most owners tend to find when they finally get one done?
Right. So as you said, most people they don't think about these things until it's too late. And most business owners or landlords, they wait until there's actually visible damage before they have an assessment done, right? Either there's some of failure, there's concrete falling, or it's severe cracks in the structure, right? And then in most cases, for the engineer, there's either no historical drawings, design drawings, historical reports to gather information from. So the engineers are usually starting from scratch, which, you can only perform a visual inspection of a building, right? Which is, you walk through the building, nobody wants you to go in and start demolishing, soffits or sheetrock or anything like that to do it. So usually there's a limited scope, right? So the more intense investigations are done when you actually have damage. And we tried as best as we can to look into crawl spaces or where we can, but it's difficult. And then the most common issues you find are, concrete in its nature, it absorbs moisture, and that leads to corrosion of the reinforcement. So there's cracking, there's spalling where there's actually concrete falling off, or you find that there's moisture getting into the buildings through either the windows and doors or the roof structure, right? And that also leads to corrosion on either steel framing inside, concrete reinforcement, etc. But if there is a maintenance program and the owners are proactive, you can catch these issues while they're minor and repair them before they become a major issue.
Definitely. I mean, it really is something I think sometimes we don't necessarily have a comprehensive sort of maintenance schedule or budget within many of our businesses to try to ensure that we keep on top of the minor, what might be minor damage or deteriorations that are happening. And of course, you wait until it becomes such a challenge, and oftentimes the outlay to remedy it becomes far more involved than what would have been if we had just attended to it a lot earlier. That I think is something that we can certainly take on board. Charles, I want to rope you in because from a climate perspective, climate science perspective, how are storm patterns shifting across the region? And I mean, we have seen about superstorms, and even this year we're supposedly in El Nino conditions. I don't know if all of us fully understand what that means. But then also, we have many of our islands, we may not necessarily regularly experience direct hurricane hits. Parts of the Eastern Caribbean, Jamaica, for example, Hurricane Melissa, granted there was Beryl just the year before, but it really had been 30 years prior since Jamaica had experienced a direct hurricane hit. So how should businesses think about the risk from tropical storms, flooding, and nearby systems?
Yeah, no, thanks, Michelle. That's a great question. Mikhail, if you could go to the next slide. I think it's important to really start with climate change as a whole, just as a 20-second summary. I think when we think about climate change, sometimes people are like, oh, I don't understand that. But essentially what we're seeing is as we emit more of these greenhouse gases, things like carbon dioxide and methane, that traps heat in our atmosphere. And the more heat we trap, the higher the temperature goes up. And so one of the things that we're seeing is the ocean takes up a lot of that excess heat, and high surface temperatures of the ocean is one of the biggest things that helps to fuel hurricanes. So we see that just yesterday, I took the screenshot of how temperatures just west of Andros have been 1.5 degrees hotter Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit for all my Bahamians. And that's how much climate change has increased just the ocean temperature in that specific area. But we're seeing this trend across the ocean, and as these temperatures go up on the sea surface, that increases the severity of storms. Mikhail, if you could go to the next slide. We're seeing this too. So if everybody can look on the left side of the slide, this is a screenshot taken from Climate Central. They did a study 2 years last year on the 2024 hurricane season. And what they found was that all of the storms were increased or worsened by climate change, where storms were the wind speeds increased by 3 to 14 miles an hour, which is the same as 5 to 22.5 kilometers an hour, which is, it might not sound like a lot, but as Chris was mentioning, there's so many aspects to storms. As temperatures rise, not only is the wind speed that could affect the structural design of buildings, but also storm surge. And with every global degree of increase of temperature, we see 7% more precipitation from these storms. So across the board, every aspect of storms, they're getting worse. And if we look on the right side of the slide from NOAA, the American government institution organization, they have something called a damage potential multiplier that just shows as the wind speeds increase how much damage potential is possible. So even if wind speeds only increase by a few miles per hour, it still has a bigger impact on the damage potential. And the final slide, Mikhail. We can see what what types of impacts it has on Hurricane Melissa as well. I think it's important to talk about Melissa, seeing that we have some folks from Jamaica in the audience, and how that's probably on top of everyone's mind. Hurricane Melissa was made worse by climate change, where wind speeds increased by 11 miles an hour. And the ocean temperatures were 1 degree Celsius higher, which just shows that climate change is making these storms worse. It's not necessarily making them more frequent, but the storms that we do have will be stronger. And that's a trend that many scientists have seen and are seeing, and we will probably continue to see. So when we talk about storm and hurricane resilience, it's not about if, it's a matter of when the next storm will come. And the theme of being proactive, I think, will continue to be echoed throughout the rest of the panel, but I think that's something that needs to be talked about, needs to be at the top of mind for everyone when we think about how do we be resilient against storms. And finally, just to touch on what are the practical applications of that, I think that looks like what Chris was talking about earlier of making sure that you have assessments of your buildings, whether that's against storm surge if you're near the coast, or strong winds if you're not, and even if you are. But also just being aware that these storms are happening. I check the NOAA Hurricane Center website every day during the hurricane season, which is the right side of the panel. I'm sure I see Chris smiling. He probably checks it as well. And it's something that it's very accessible. They update it a few times a day. It's just something to know when storms are coming. I took the screenshot yesterday, so there's nothing in the immediate time frame, but it's just something to be aware of that you can see as storms are coming. So final points: be prepared, stay aware of storms and events that are happening, and I think just echoing the point of be proactive when it comes to being prepared for hurricanes, because they will come. So it's just a matter of when.
Absolutely. And I think this year the predictions is that, oh, we will have a lower than average hurricane season. And I think it's 13 instead of 14. But I think between 3 and 5 major hurricanes are also predicted within the season. And they are most likely going to happen earlier in the season rather than later. That was, I think, part of the prediction. So as I think Chaz is saying, we are seeing some significant changes, some of it due to climate change and just the severity of the storms, because I think even for Hurricane Melissa, it grew in intensity very, very quickly at various varying points during its path throughout the region. And much of that would have been due to the warmer waters, etc., that we have currently. So I think it is very, very sobering that we are in the midst of the 2026 hurricane season, which started nearly a month ago. And so we still have at least a good 5 months before hopefully we might be able to breathe a sigh of relief and hopefully begin to recoup whatever that might mean. But knowing that 2027 will be around the corner and we will again need to be prepared. So Chaz and Chris, just to wrap up this topic, what is the one physical protection step a business should take before July 1st, which is within the next week, if they haven't done anything as yet? Chris, start us, and then Chaz, round us off, please.
Yeah, I mean, as any business, I think invest in some sort of hurricane protection, right? Shutters, those, I mean, most people get prepared because when a storm is on its way, the uh, the the lumber yards are going to be busy. But if you invest in some proper metal shutters that you can put up or take down, or it may be too late to invest in hurricane rated windows or doors, but definitely shutters to protect your building. Any way that you can protect from storm surge if you're in an area that gets inundated from storm surge, and move any critical equipment away from the exterior of the building, floor if you can.
Yeah, those are some great points, Chris. I totally agree. And I think I'll take a slightly different angle to it, Michelle, but I think just thinking about in aviation, they have redundancy upon redundancy upon redundancy. And I think to my point at the beginning of the panel of a single point of failure, if you're looking at where your business has these single points of failure and finding out ways to have redundancy in those areas, because the storms only last for a few hours to several hours, maybe a day or two. But the biggest thing that we see is after the storm, you're weeks without power. You need to be operational. So looking at where those gaps are, so even after the storm, you can get back to work as soon as possible. So I think finding ways to remove or add redundancy, I should say.
Definitely. I mean, to Chris's point. So, in addition to oh gosh, the windows, the barriers he was talking about, I just storm shutters, but maybe to tarpaulins, all of the things that you might need if and to have them ready in advance, to have those things as opposed to trying to rush out once you hear that a storm is imminent, and you now need to prepare. So having some of those supplies at hand, and certainly as Chaz was saying, looking at really business continuity. If by chance you, the operations cannot be restored in full, the infrastructure goes down, how are you going to manage? What are the redundancies that you can put in place? So I definitely think that these are points that we can take to heart. All right, so we're going to move on to topic 2, which is the insurance readiness. But before we do that, I mean, I do want to acknowledge all of the places where we have been joined from, which include Jamaica, Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago. We have people from St. Lucia as well, and many of these countries know what it's like to experience some sort of hurricane or other natural disaster that could affect business continuity. So I really wanted to thank them for taking the time to join us. And we want to just have a poll question now. And the question that we like to start off with is, how recently has your organization reviewed its insurance coverage against current replacement costs and business interruption needs? And for that, we have options such as whether you've done it this year, how recently, within the last 2 years, more than 2 years ago. We only renew if we do not review in detail, or you're not sure. So let's ask you now to at least respond to the poll, and we can move on to the next matter. Okay, so and I'd ask though that after you've done with the poll, and join us in the chat, and since we're going into the session on insurance readiness, what would slow down your claim after a storm? Is it, missing photos, asset records, valuations, policy exclusions, or something else? So if you want to tackle that in the chat, I'd be most grateful, and we'll get back to that at a later date. So, Gabrielle, we're going to turn to you. You are our insurance queen on the panel today. So if you can help us to clarify the difference between flood insurance, named storm coverage, catastrophic coverage, and business interruption insurance. Because when we have like a hurricane or tropical storm, what are the most common reasons claims get delayed or denied?
All right. Oh, thank you very much for that, Michelle, and good morning to everyone. So that question packs a lot in there. So I want to first start with clarifying what we have called catastrophic insurance actually encompasses events that are of high severity on a large scale that cause a lot of damage. Now, items like floods and whatnot are perils that could occur during a catastrophic event. And so it's very important for persons to understand that catastrophic coverage encompasses various types of perils, which could include flooding that happens as a result of that storm. Now, a named storm is typically a storm that has sustained winds around 63 kilometers, 39 miles per hour internationally. And usually we'll hear like Tropical Storm Larry or, Hurricane George, etc. That's what we would consider a named storm. And normally when you have a storm that is named, it's automatically classed in the category of a catastrophic event in terms of insurance. So with respect to flooding, it's basically water damage that could occur to any property due to an excess occurrence of water. And like I would have said before, it could happen because of a catastrophic event or outside of a catastrophic event. So flooding on its own can be considered something that could happen at a serious event, or could happen just something that's outside of a hurricane or earthquake or anything like that. It could actually just be an excess of water that's occurring. So what could affect the claim being delayed? Volume, right? So obviously, if you have an event that has caused a massive damage along a territory, you would have a lot of people that are trying to claim. And so the sheer volume will slow down the ability for those claims to be dealt with. Also, you have difficulty accessing the premises sometimes. As we would have known in Dorian, it took a very long time before anybody could get on the ground to make any assessments because of the severity of the damage. You can also have documentation challenges where you don't have sufficient documentation. Maybe claim forms haven't been submitted. You're not sure what you had covered. You may not have any photos or invoices, and so you're having difficulty substantiating the extent of your loss. Now, in terms of denying your claim, sometimes there are things that are not covered, right? For example, there's exclusions to your policy. So for a catastrophic claim, your deductible, which is typically in the Bahamas 2% of the sums insured. So if your sums insured is $100,000 and you have a deductible of 2%, then $2,000 of your claim you are basically responsible for. So you won't be able to claim for anything underneath $2,000 for a catastrophic loss. Or also, you can have instances where you simply don't have catastrophic cover. So maybe you let your policy lapse, or you maybe didn't pay the premium, or you just have coverage that excludes catastrophe on the whole. All right. And so in instances where you do have the catastrophe coverage, perhaps you may not have included a structure that's detached from the main home. Maybe you have a guest house that you didn't actually place insurance coverage on, or maybe if you're waterfront, you have a seawall or a dock that you didn't think to insure. And so those are usually the first pieces of property that are going to get damaged, and that people may not think about insuring. So you won't be able to make a claim on something that you have not included under your policy, which is why it's very important to review your policy regularly to make sure that there are no gaps and you haven't overlooked any items. And so those are just some of the main reasons why you could have a claim delayed or denied.
Thank you so much for that, Gabrielle. And before I have some follow-up questions, but let's probably just go to the poll and see what some of the responses have been. So the question was, how recently has your organization reviewed its insurance coverage against current replacement costs and business interruption? And I think it's quite sobering that at least 61% of our respondents are not sure. So that I think, is something to consider. Luckily, there are others who have at least done it this year, 22%, or 26%, and now within the last 2 years and more than 2 years ago, as well as we only renew. We do not review in detail. So those are things that, of course, good, but perhaps we need to be able to just be a little bit more proactive, considering all of what Gabrielle has said. Gabrielle, though, from what you said, I just had a couple of questions. We just, some brief responses. But I tend to find though that one of the popular um types of coverage that businesses tend to go for is fire and peril. But peril, I think, is sort of all-encompassing term, but it may not be enough. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. And the other question I wanted to ask was that what happens if you are in a, let's say, a commercial building or a building where there may be multiple units? So you may not individually be responsible for insuring the entire building. You may try to insure your unit, but that may not necessarily work because you are in a larger structure over which you really don't have much control. So just probably shed some light on those two things, please.
Okay, with respect to fire and perils, every business needs to examine their policy to ensure that whether it notes that they have fire and perils insurance, including catastrophe perils or excluding catastrophe perils. That's very important because that makes the difference between you being insured for a catastrophic loss, a hurricane or tornado, etc., or you not having the cover. Now, one way that you can really quickly know is if your premium is fairly low, then you can feel assured that you do not have the catastrophe cover, because typically that could be 2 to 3 times more than the excluding catastrophe cover. So fire and perils is a part of the description, but the most important part that you want to pay attention to is whether it says including or excluding catastrophe perils. Now, with respect to a business that may occupy a space that they may not own, and may have other tenants in the building, this is where you really want to look at having business interruption cover, because if the building is not owned by you and it's damaged, you can't control how quickly the owner will make the repairs, whether they have. That's maybe a question you would want to ask your landlord or the property owner. Do you have hurricane insurance in place, right? So secondly, you as the business owner, there are steps that you can take to manage your own risk, where you can actually take out insurance on the improvements that you've made to your unit specifically, right? And then you can also, if it's a commercial space, then you have to take out business interruption cover, which would provide you with coverage to maybe rent another space if your unit is damaged and there's no repair in sight. But it's important that you understand your business needs. Look at your exposure if something bad was to happen, and what is outside of your control in terms of where you're located, and speak with your insurance provider to try and close some of those coverage gaps.
Thanks so much for that, Gabrielle. Now, if you can just walk us through what insurance readiness actually looks like in practice. What should a business be reviewing right now to make sure the policy they
Hello?
Hi, did you hear me?
Yes. So, sorry, it took a little dip there. I'm not sure whose end that was on. But yes, to make sure that you're ready, you definitely want to review your coverage. Make sure you understand what you're insured for. This is where your agent is gonna be able to assist you, and let them tell you. Let them break it down for you. Ask questions, because you know your business better than anybody else, and so get as much understanding and knowledge about your policy as possible. Then you want to make sure that you have all your assets documented. The reason being that can make the difference between you being able to get a quick settlement and there being delays in your settlement. So take an inventory of the equipment you may have, any renovations you may have done, um, any new properties or extensions, anything like that. Your stock, all of those things you have to take into consideration. So make sure that you have documented that what they cost, and if you're depreciating your assets, what the depreciated value is. Make sure you're insuring for the actual cost of it and not the depreciated value, because if there's a loss, then you're going to have some challenges with under insurance there. So yes, checking your valuation, and like I said, you need to make sure that you've planned for the unlikely event that you may not be able to operate. What do you need in order to make sure that your business survives? These are the questions that you have to ask. Do you want to make sure that you can pay staff to keep them? Because, obviously, if you're not operating, you don't have any revenue from which to pay your staff. And you may have some key staff that you may want to make sure you can hold on to. So all of these things can be covered by business interruption insurance. And in order to have business interruption insurance, you would actually have to make sure that you have your property insured. So all of these things, you should sit down with your insurance company, your agent, and discuss them, ask the questions that are pertinent to you, and really make sure that you understand what coverage you have right now and what gaps exist and how to remedy those gaps.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, so Gabrielle, just a couple more questions, and if you can just try and be a bit succinct with your responses. Is there any such thing as being over-insured? How does a business know if their coverage actually reflects their current risk exposure?
Well, yes, you can be over-insured, but it's better to err on the side of caution, right? Because if you try to run it too thin, you could risk being underinsured. And you'd be able to know if your coverage reflects your exposure by getting an appraisal, having your property surveyed. That's the best way, because you want to make sure that your building may be 10 years old. Prices may have increased. So just making sure that you have your properties surveyed and appraised to know exactly what the current values are.
Okay, definitely. A very valid points. And finally, what is the one insurance conversation every business leader in this room should have before peak season?
Ask yourself what can go wrong that will significantly impact your ability to operate. And then ask yourself, what can I do to mitigate against these exposures? And that's something that you should discuss with your insurance provider, so that they can give you guidance. And I like to say that you you want to make sure insurance is something that you don't want to get when you need it. You want to have it before you need it. And so it's important to have those conversations in advance.
Thank you so much, and absolutely true. So we're going to move on to topic 3, which is going to be on digital resilience. But before we do that, another poll question. If your office became inaccessible tomorrow, how quickly could your team access critical systems and data? And the options include immediately, within a few hours, within 1 to 2 days, more than 2 days. We have not tested this. So if you would go ahead and respond to that in our little poll, we would really appreciate it. Okay, so in digital resilience, Mark, we're coming to you. And when a major storm hits and a business office goes dark, what's the difference between an organization that keeps running and one that completely goes offline? When we talk about keeping a business running, it's really not about whether the company has remote work capability. There is also a human side. Staff may not have power, internet, childcare, fuel, or a safe place to work from. How should business leaders build continuity plans that are technically strong, but also realistic for their teams?
Yeah, that's a good question. So thank you. And it's probably the most difficult question I've looked at on our panel here for myself because it involves human beings, and human beings are wonderful but also unpredictable. And as engineers, you want to control as much as you can, or at least account for what you cannot. Um, but from a perspective of keeping the business running, all the things you see on the right side there are very important: sovereign cloud infrastructure, backups, replication. But from the human element, and I have unfortunately a current example. We have an employee in Venezuela, and unfortunately, you may have heard there was a large earthquake there yesterday, and he's currently okay. He's good. So make sure your people are okay in any sort of disaster. Without your staff, your employees, they're humans. Without them, you have no business anyway. So we know that he's okay. B, we're going to do whatever we can to help him and his family because that's incredibly important for when he's ready to come back. And C, what we've done for ourselves as a business is put in place mechanisms so that when an individual isn't able to fulfill their duties for very good reason, someone else can pick up that workload because we still have to carry on as a business. So in this case, there are people that can do the tasks that were typically assigned to him. So we're taking care of both sides of the equation as the business and the people. So that's really important to ensure we have that mapped out. So we do a lot of cross training to that effect. Whereas we have people from finance that may have an interest in technology and they'll shadow an engineer, or a person in marketing might be interested in finance. And so we have a cross functional capability. So that's a great way to do that. We also do what we call a tabletop exercise. We actually had that yesterday as well, where we basically play out what happens in the case of a disaster. What do we do? Who does what and when? So we already know how to do things before we need to do them. It's never good to practice in a disaster. And of course, on the technical side of things, the most basic things you can do is having backup and replication. What that means is, worst case scenario, your data is somewhere else. So for people that have servers on premise, a lot of times we see they also have their backups on premise, which means if the building's affected, everything's affected. So have it somewhere physically separate. As we talked about today, buildings, especially office buildings, are maybe not always built to withstand the events we'd like them to withstand, but a lot of facilities that we operate in, for example, are purpose built to withstand natural disasters, storms, hurricanes, and we've seen that throughout the years we've been in business. So those are the important things to keep running when the worst happens.
Thanks for that, Mark, because I really think you really mentioned about the tabletop exercises and the cross-functional sort of training, shadowing each other, because you never know who.
Oh, did we lose Michelle?
Of course. Oh, hello.
You're back. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. No, I was just saying that I really appreciated your points on cross-functional capabilities and the tabletop exercises to really sort of practice before what might be the different scenarios, who might be affected, and how to increase the resilience within the organization, especially from the human resource perspective. Okay, let's look at the poll results. And let's see what you all have been saying. Okay, well, we see though that if your office becomes inaccessible tomorrow, how quickly could your teams access critical systems and data? And 45% of you said within a few hours, which it's very gratifying. I think, of course, usually within if there is some sort of disaster, it may take you a little moment to sort of get your bearings, but hopefully within a few hours at least one will be able to get the business at least whether up and running or in a position to mobilize itself soon thereafter. We do have a few who have not really tested this, and nobody said more than 2 days. So at least I think we are doing relatively well. Of course, it would be great if more people could just ensure that their businesses can really bounce back to the best that it can if there is some reason why it becomes inaccessible. Okay, Mark, just going back now, I have I think about a couple more questions for you. So you find that business leaders really ask before a storm, but always wish they had after. How fast can we get back up? how much data or transactions are we willing to lose? Walk us through what recovery time and recovery point objectives actually mean in practice, and specifically how Cloud Carib helps Caribbean business define and hit those numbers before a storm ever arrives.
Yeah, those are great questions actually, and so we get that a lot. And RPO and RTO, as you describe them, recovery time objective is, as we mentioned in our poll, how long until you can actually get back into business, right? How many hours or days or weeks will it take you to get back up and running? Recovery point objective is arguably the more important piece of the puzzle, meaning how much data can you afford to lose before you're up and running, or at the point of disaster, when can you recover that data? And what that it means different things to different companies or people. If you're an Amazon or a trading platform for stocks or anything else, even a second or two of delay could mean millions of dollars lost. A typical company doesn't necessarily have that sort of change rate, meaning if I'm working at my company today and I'm working a document and then there's a failure overnight, maybe I'll lose that document, but I'm not going to lose the business. That's my recovery point. How much data can I lose, recovery time, and how much until I can get back up and running? And the way we address that at Cloud Carib is with two things. One is backup and one is replication. Backup in itself will protect your data from the worst case scenario of your building's gone, your servers are gone, if you're not in the cloud at all. Some customers are, some aren't. What that means though is, especially in a disaster, it could take weeks or months to get new servers, for example, in country to rebuild to then actually restore your data too. So until then, it's like having a USB drive with data, but no laptop to look at the files with. It doesn't do you much good. The data is safe, but it's not functional. Um, so replication, it literally means, imagine you had your laptop being copied elsewhere. So if your laptop stops working today, you can walk over, to the cafe and get the other laptop that's exactly the same. That's replication. It's a copy of the data in full, not just the files, but the Windows or the Linux or the MacBook that you can actually do work on. Those are the differences between replication and backup. So for disaster recovery, we look at replication for the fastest possible recovery time as well as recovery point. And we look at shrinking those windows as much as possible. But the less data you can afford to lose, the more you're likely to have to spend to make sure that happens. So we want a happy medium between the two.
Definitely. And for businesses that are still running mostly on-premise servers, what is the minimum viable data resilience setup they should have in place before hurricane season peaks?
Yeah, another important question. And some people think, well, I just have backups. So if anything happens, I have my backup data. As I mentioned earlier, backups are the minimum you can do, but it also means you need to be prepared to have no business to run for maybe a prolonged amount of time because you have nothing to put that data on. Again, I have files on a USB drive, but I have no laptop. What do I do with those files? I can't look at the Excel file. I can't edit a Word document. I need something to put that data on. So the minimum to keep your business at least intact somewhat is backups, but replication is the more robust and complete solution so you can keep the business running as quickly as possible.
And I think my final question, can you share an example of a Caribbean business or government that keeps operating through a major storm specifically because of the infrastructure Cloud Carib has put in place for them?
Absolutely. So, we do a lot of work with government, financial services, healthcare, all institutions that need to keep up and running regardless of hurricanes or even a human error. So we did have an experience recently with one of the governments we managed, quite a large one, that took steps proactively quite a few years ago to be able to continue governing without a physical space to work in. So they were able to vote on legislation, pass laws, maybe a law for emergency relief services, remotely with things like WebEx hosted by Cloud Carib in resilient infrastructure so that when things locally stopped working, so their environment was down, they couldn't enter the buildings of government, they're able to work from wherever they happen to be and carry on the business of government. So that was very important, but that takes planning and more importantly, testing. So I'm glad that everyone on the poll said that they can recover within a few hours or days. I just hope those plans have been tested.
Definitely. Okay, so we're finished at least hearing from our panelists and what they've had to say across the various pillars. So it's now time to hear from you, our audience. So, drop your questions in the chat and we'll tackle them, as many of them as we can in the time that we have. So while you do so, let me at least ask a few questions myself, because I had some points, but of course, only give a Caribbean business leader one piece of advice for this hurricane season, what would it be? Let's start with Chaz, then Chris, then Gabrielle, and then Mark.
Sure, Michelle, would you mind repeating the question? You cut out halfway.
If you could give only one piece of advice to a Caribbean business leader for this hurricane season, what would it be?
I think tying up what everybody has been talking about, the frame or the mindset of being proactive. So every business is different. So the best, quote unquote, best thing that, or the most important thing that you might need to do may differ. But I think looking at what are your biggest risks when it comes to a hurricane, whether it might be from the digital standpoint or structural building or insurance or whatever that may be, I think looking at just taking stock of your business, where are your biggest risks, and starting with that, I would say.
Chris?
Yeah, to follow up on Charles's point, I would say, most people have an idea in their head what they're going to do in the case of a storm event. I think it's important to have a program that you have on paper, right? More or less a checklist to go through in the event of a storm. Okay, 3 days out, 2 days out, what you have to do to protect the business as well as prepare, your employees and their, residences for an incoming storm.
And I would say, take out the hurricane insurance, take out the catastrophe insurance. Yes, it may be more costly, but what's more costly than having to start from scratch? A business you've taken years to build, and all the expenses that go with it. The insurance is trading, which you do know, which is the cost of your premium, for what you don't know, which is that major loss that could be around the corner.
Absolutely. And Mark?
I think the most important thing to realize is just start. Don't just wait and see and hope for the best. Just start with something. Some people are afraid of the cost implications. It's not always as expensive as you might think, but the cost of doing nothing is worse. So just do something.
Definitely. Oh, okay. So, Chris, are there any specific building types or ages that are most at risk in the Caribbean?
They're definitely across the Caribbean, as I said, because of the way that our building codes were these, essentially prescriptive, right? So there are a lot of buildings across the Caribbean that are built either outside the regulatory framework, right? So they're not following the building code, and they're getting built informally, as well as buildings that are predate our formal building codes across the region. And there's also a risk for, as you see now, there's a lot of commercial buildings being imported from the Far East, right? And sometimes they're not designed for the correct wind speed, and those buildings are typically erected, and then sort of there's a fight with the regulators to say whether or not they can utilize them, right? And there's also many buildings that have been built with techniques like either unreinforced masonry, right, as well as timber. And these buildings are not really designed to stand up to those wind loads or those storm surge conditions that we've been experiencing.
Okay, before I have a couple more questions to ask while we wait, hopefully, for our audience to give us some questions. But in the meantime, another poll question: what is the first action your organization should take after today's session? Schedule a structural assessment, review insurance coverage and documentation, test backups and disaster recovery, update the business continuity plan, brief leadership on storm readiness gaps. So if you would go ahead and respond to this question. And in the meantime, Mark, how long?
Sorry, Michelle, you cut out there for a minute.
How long does it typically take to get a proper cloud disaster recovery setup in place?
So from first conversations to implementation, we've done it anywhere from 5 business days to sometimes months, depending on the complexity. But that's why I said earlier, it's never too late to start, even in short time frames, because things can happen faster than you think if everything's in place.
Definitely. And it also just goes back to, sometimes I think businesses don't understand, or business leaders don't understand their own businesses. Sometimes, depending on the organization, it has grown organically. And so one may either take for granted certain things and really don't appreciate the import of certain processes or functions, etc. And it really requires a comprehensive sort of interrogation of one's operations to really understand what is critical and all of the elements that need to be addressed to really help to facilitate true business continuity and disaster resilience as well. Gabrielle, should businesses review their policies every year, even if nothing has changed?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There should be 2 reviews. You should review it internally. So get with your finance people, your asset management people, and review internally, and then also sit down and review with your insurance agent, your insurance company, broker, whoever it is that you utilize to get your insurance coverage. That's very, very important every year. Even if just to say, oh, nothing's changed, that's important too.
All right, and let's just go to our final poll. So what is the first action your organization should take after today's session? And I guess overwhelmingly people are thinking that they need to go and update their business continuity plan, which is of course excellent. We have reviewing the insurance coverage and documentation, testing backups and disaster recovery, brief leadership on storm readiness gaps. It doesn't seem as if people think it's necessary to do a structural assessment. Granted that in and of itself can be quite involved, but at least I think that hopefully coming out of today's conversation, we are seeing the need to at least revisit whatever systems and structures we might have in place to address disaster management and disaster recovery, and as well as business continuity. All right, as we begin to just draw this conversation to a close, I think just the last thing that I want to share it's your building, it's your people, your insurance, your systems, your data, your vendors. Your ability to make decisions before the storm is already at your doorstep. So just a final question for everyone, and if you can complete this sentence. The one thing every Caribbean business should do before the next storm hits is, Chaz, start us off, then Chris, then Gabrielle, and Mark, you'll round us off, please.
Be aware of storms when they're coming, and get resilient, get insurance, get a structural assessment, make sure your data is secured.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I would just re-emphasize that point that I made from earlier, right? I mean, make sure that you have systems in place to protect your building, to protect your data, and even make your employees aware of what they need to do to protect their selves and their structures as well, so that after the storm you can get back up to speed as quickly as possible.
Gabrielle?
Yeah, and of course, I'm going to tell you, get the insurance, right? Why not? Right? But also, you need to get your structures surveyed. You need to get them looked at, because if you're not maintaining your property properly, you could have some issues when it comes to your claim. And so that's important as well. Make sure that your structures are sound, because that impacts how much of a loss you will have or could have. Make sure your structures are sound. Get it assessed. Be prepared, and then come get the insurance.
And Mark?
Yeah, make sure the building's sound, make sure you have insurance, and call us.
Thank you so much to our panelists,
Thank
Mark, Chris, Gabrielle, and Chaz. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. A special thank you to our host, Cloud Carib, for hosting this important conversation. Hurricane season doesn't wait, and neither should your continuity plan. If you'd like to speak to any one of our panelists directly, their details will be shared in the follow-up email. We'll also be sending a recording and a summary of today's key takeaways. So please feel free to contact Cloud Carib to assist your teams with your business continuity plans at contact@cloudcarib.com. Stay safe, stay prepared, and thank you for being Cat 5 ready. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.